Get ready to dive into the comic book realm, where heroes rise and villains take the helm. We're here to dissect the stories and the art. Our source material, we tear the panels apart.
All right, let me pull up my notes here for Joe the Barbarian. This came out in 2010. There was a total of 8 issues for this series, written by Grant Morrison, Sean Gordon Murphy on art, lettered by Todd Klein, colored by Dave Stewart. And our plot synopsis goes a little something like this. Joe the Barbarian follows 13-year-old Joe Manson, a kid living with type 1 diabetes and the lingering grief of losing his father. One stormy afternoon, alone in his attic, Joe's blood sugar crashes, sending him into a vivid hallucination in which his house transforms into a sprawling fantasy realm called Aqua Lung. Don't start singing. There he is, seen as the dying boy, a prophesied savior destined to defeat the encroaching force of King Death. As Joe stumbles through the real house searching for sugar to save his life, every room becomes a battleground or kingdom. His toys morph into warriors and allies. His pet rat becomes a heroic companion, and ordinary household hazards become epic threats. The story interweaves Joe's desperate physical struggle with his emotional journey through grief, fear, and self-doubt. In the end, Joe survives the hypoglycemic episode, emerges more confident and self-assured, and even discovers the deed to the family home, saving not only himself, but his mother's future as well. So there you go. That is our plot for Joe the Barbarian. I thought I'd take a few minutes here and gather my thoughts again for Joe the Barbarian. I don't know how well I was able to get my feelings about this book across. You'll hear that Mark was not very impressed with the book, but I found that there was a lot being said in it. I'll just go through as quick as I can here. When we get into this, we meet Joe, our main character. He's a 13-year-old kid caught between childhood imagination and real-life responsibilities. I know at 13, I could see myself in the middle of that, still playing with my G.I. Joes and growing up a little bit. I didn't have it as bad as Joe did with his family situation. I'm sure Joe's under a lot of stress for what's going on. Plus, he's got this illness. While what happens in the book doesn't really feel too medically literal, it didn't break the fiction for me. It's a story tool, and I get that this is not a real-life simulation. Joe is seeing these things and taking on this magical journey, and his diabetes is what gets him there. When you start to look at this and what he's going through, you got to think about the mindset of Joe. At the beginning of this book, he talks to his dad at a gravesite. His dad had passed away. So I'm sure that Joe's grieving for his father, and that definitely has a hand in what occurs in the book, especially in the fantasy land. There are 2 antagonists, or at least 2 main characters in this book are represented by Joe's father. But you also got to look at, throughout this whole story, everybody in the land of Aqua Lung refers to Joe as the dying boy. And I didn't fully understand that until afterwards. I mean, with diabetes, he's constantly living in the fear of death, and this is actually an episode where he is on the precipice of dying. I feel that definitely is a reflection of his life and what he's been told all his life. You watch Joe grow throughout this whole ordeal. He gets increased confidence. He's got purpose. And after he's survived everything, he was able to get a soda. He's able to get his sugar under control. He comes out of the house, and his mom, who's been worried about caring for Joe and keeping the house, he had found a letter that his dad had wrote and a deed to the house. I think looking back on it, this fantasy, not only was it potentially diabetic-induced hallucination, but it was also self-therapy. When you look at this story as a whole, Joe is unwillingly on this journey, but he's coming out of it a changed person, working through his trauma. While Joe probably had the strength in him already to address it, the hallucination fast-tracked that realization. When you compare him to kind of like some other young protagonists, Joe has a more tragic, like confused presence to him. And as he's going through this, he's figuring things out moment by moment. A lot of the stuff is very foreign to him, and he's trying to make sense of what he's seeing. And he understands, like, he's got to get basically from the attic to the basement. But there's this crazy adventure in between. And yeah, this story shows how kids process trauma by reshaping the world with whatever emotional tools they have available. When he makes it down to the basement and things begin to fall apart for him as he is about to potentially die, Joe has just got to continue to try to survive. That was probably the strongest moment in the book where real danger and fantasy heroism took place. At some points, I was wondering if Aqua Lung was more than imagination. After Joe recovered, the characters in Aqua Lung continued. At the end, I just read that as a metaphorical continuation of this fantasy land. There was a lot of ambiguity. I didn't feel that distracted or frustrated me. If anything, Morrison likes to influence how readers feel with the way he writes. Joe's confused, and it was probably important for Morrison to get it across to the reader and confuse them as well. His mother was always supportive. It wasn't until after reading the book I realized that Queen Bree, who is a character that shows up towards the end, was actually a representation of Joe's mother. And I didn't initially catch that King Death was a symbolic representation of Joe's father who had passed away. I did not read the Iron Knight as the father figure either. I thought he was the embodiment of death coming for Joe, and he had to fight against that. I think the biggest theme of the book is survival, making sense of what the brain does under extreme stress. I really feel that that's kind of clinical, but that's what I took from it. Survival and coping. I mean, kids cope different than adults. And what we got to see here was Joe's brain grab whatever was around him and built a story, a fantasy land, to work through and try and save himself. I think there's something to be said about that. There's some value in imagination. We all encourage our kids to use their imagination. And in some cases, people need it to survive overwhelming circumstances. I think Sean Murphy does a good job of keeping you from getting lost in this crazy world that's being built. You can usually tell what fantasy elements correspond to the real world. And I think this fantasy that is created is dense, it's rich, there's emotional weight to some of these characters. The pacing sometimes did feel a little stretched due to extended world building. I got the concept of what was going on here, and it took 8 issues to get there, which was kind of long. All right, let's get back to our discussion. Mark, I'll throw it to you here. What did you think of this book?
So it's a DC Black Label, which I find interesting because DC Black Label tends to be some pretty intense stuff. And this is like a YA novel. This was an Eisner Award nominee. The first thing that jumped out at me was this reminded me of The Neverending Story.
Oh my gosh. I'll just go ahead and cross the note off. That's exactly what I wrote down here too. This gave me such Neverending Story vibes. A lot of it is because we have King Death and the blackness that is coming for him. So yeah, I agree.
What is it that fucking eats the horse and they're trying to escape in The Neverending Story?
Oh my goodness. I used
The
to know what it
Nothing.
was. The Nothing. Yes, that's it.
Yeah, so we have a typical neurodivergent bullied kid who has a debilitating disease and diabetes, which I laughed at because I just got diagnosed with diabetes. My doctor was like, you have high cholesterol, exceedingly high cholesterol, and your diabetes is really bad. So here's drugs. Also, you need to change your diet. So like, all right, well, what do you want me to eat? He was like, well, you need to eat nothing but vegetables because that's all that's left on earth for you after you've eaten the entire candy aisle and your weight in fried meat. That's what I heard, at least.
Right.
But the mom, and I didn't pick it up at first until they made a bigger deal out of it, but the mom was like, I packed you a bunch of candy. And I'm like, why?
Why would you do that?
And the candy, the soda is so that he can get enough sugar so he doesn't have an insulin coma.
Right.
Diabetic coma. But anyway, what did you think of the book? The book's okay. It's a 5 on a 10-point scale for me. I can put myself in the place of a very young boy. I ought to give this to my son to read. I think he'd enjoy it because he's still a child despite being precocious. I think he would appreciate the book more than I would. As an adult, a very cynical, contemptuous adult, I'm like, it's fine. I've seen this before. I've seen the never-ending story. I've seen the neurodivergent, nerdy boy who is the last Starfighter being another example of this. Granted, the kid's older. He's in his late teens, early 20s. But he still gets whisked off to a fantasy. Alice in Wonderland. My life sucks. Being British, upper middle class or upper class white sucks. I want to go to a place where everyone knows my name. And she goes into fucking Acidville, Wonderland, when nothing makes any sense. And up is down, right and left. And dogs and cats live together. She's just like, what? I'll go back to being British. It's fine. This is terrible. I've made a terrible mistake. So the idea of the othered child going to a fantasy realm is not a new concept. It is as old as time itself, and it's probably the most often one. I mean, look at Harry Potter. Harry Potter doesn't necessarily know if he's got magical abilities when it starts. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Sometimes he doesn't know why he's doing it. And then he gets what every woman wants. He gets that letter from Hogwarts. And he's like, oh, I can be whisked to a fantasy world where my dreams will come true, and I am the chosen one. I am powerful. I'm special in some way. I don't understand why women love the Harry Potter books so much.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
So I'm in rare form tonight, Jesse. So I see a lot of that kind of thing over and over again, and it's as present here as it is anywhere else. That being said, I don't think it's bad. It's just like, okay, I'm not really in a place where I want to be whisked away to a fantasy world.
Yeah. I mean, the YA novel stuff that you were talking about earlier, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. The one thing I did like was Grant Morrison playing with the unreliable narrator. And this one, it's very unclear. You really don't know if he's going to Wonderland or if he's just hallucinating, or if this is a Calvin and Hobbes kind of a thing where it's clearly that kid's imagination, but it's presented as extremely vivid. So you, as the reader, go wherever Calvin goes.
Mm-hmm.
If Calvin is on a pirate ship, you're on that pirate ship. That pirate ship is as real as anything else. The reality is the super context of Calvin and Hobbes is none of it's real.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a very vivid imagination. You don't know that about Joe the Barbarian. You don't know what's going on with this kid or what his deal is. That is the one interesting element about this book that maybe separates it from the 87 I just listed.
I enjoyed what I read here. I think 8 issues. Again, it's a long story, and it really, just like you said, it doesn't, with it being Black Label / Vertigo, it's not going to be inside of the DC universe proper. So it's not really going to have meaningful consequences or anything like that. Joe's not going to show up in another DC book or anything. So it's just a one-off 8-issue story. That
turns out Clark Kent's his dad.
So as far as story goes, I mean, I enjoyed what I read. I would assume that if anybody's a fan of Grant Morrison, they'll probably pick it up.
Turns out Bruce Wayne's his dad, and this is an affair. He's quietly supporting this family, but they can't know. He doesn't know Bruce Wayne's his dad.
Right.
I would love that. My dad is Batman, and I have diabetes? How does that work?
You're not getting a sequel, Joe. Sorry. This is your story, and that is the end. Aside from that, I don't have anything else either, man. That was all my notes.
Thanks for joining us. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, Please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.